You're listening to audio from Cities Church. You can find more resources and learn about our ministry by visiting citieschurch.com.
So before we get started this morning in Mark chapter 9, I want to read something to you from somewhere later in the New Testament. It's found in the book of 2 Peter chapter 1 and verses 16 to 18. So if you want to turn there, 2 Peter chapter 1. We've mentioned this before, but I think it's fascinating that the Gospel of Mark is dependent upon the eyewitness account of the Apostle Peter. So Mark did not write the Gospel of Mark. Mark wrote the Gospel of Mark, but Mark relied upon Peter's firsthand report. Peter told Mark what happened. And then later in his life, Peter did write some letters, and the letter of 2 Peter is the last letter he wrote. It's dated somewhere between the years 64 and 67, sometime before Peter was executed under Nero, which means that Peter wrote this letter in a Roman prison awaiting his execution, and he wrote it to encourage struggling Christians. And this is what he says, 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 16. For we did not follow cleverly devised myths when we made known to you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. But we were eyewitnesses of his majesty. For when he received honor and glory from God the Father, and the voice was borne to him by the majestic glory, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased," we ourselves heard this very voice born from heaven, for we were with him on the holy mountain. So Peter here is recalling an event in Jesus' life called the Transfiguration. He's referring to what Mark shows us in Mark chapter 9. Or another way that we could say it, here in 2 Peter 1, Peter is talking about what he has told Mark about, which is what we have just read about in Mark chapter 9, verses 1 to 8. So now turn back to Mark 9, if you can. Mark 9 is our passage today, and there's a lot happening here in the Transfiguration. The Transfiguration is a key event in Jesus' earthly ministry because of what it communicates about him. And there are three things I want us to see this morning. And so the plan for the sermon is pretty simple. It goes like this. First, we're just going to highlight three messages about Jesus in the Transfiguration. And then second, we're going to ask, what does this mean for us? That's it. 2 points. Let's pray. We'll get started. Father, this morning as we open your word, we ask simply that you would show us your Son. Make us see Jesus truly. Make us see Jesus for who he is. By the power of your Spirit, we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So there are at least three messages about Jesus in the Transfiguration, and here's the first one. Number one, Jesus is the revelation of God's character. And in a way, we see this throughout the whole story here, but I want you to notice right away a couple things in verse 2. Mark begins here by referencing 6 days and a high mountain. Verse 2, he says, after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And so Mark gives us here a time frame, a setting, and the company, which is not the crowd now. It's not even all the disciples. It's just Peter, James, and John. So what Mark gives us here is we have 6 days, we have a high mountain, and we have an exclusive audience. And if we put those things together with the fact that Jesus was transfigured, we start to pick up on an allusion to the Old Testament. When Mark says that Jesus was transfigured before them, it means that these three disciples, Peter, James, and John, they got to see an unseen vantage of who Jesus is. Jesus' appearance transformed. and he displayed his glory here straight up with nothing in the way. These guys, Jesus allowed these guys to witness his majesty. That's what Peter calls it in 2 Peter 1. And so this event is an extra special revelation from Jesus. And it takes us back to Mount Sinai when God did the same thing for Moses. You don't have to turn back to Exodus, but it's in Exodus 24. I want to set the scene up for you. When God gave Israel the law, as Pastor Kevin was talking about, he gave the law to Moses, who he called up on a mountain by himself. And so Mount Sinai in the Bible is seen as this place where God revealed his moral will. It's the place where God is showing his people what he is like and how they should live. And this is how it's described in Exodus 24, verse 12. The Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and wait there. And I will give you tablets of stone with the law and the commandment which I have written for their instruction." So Moses rose with his assistant Joshua, and Moses went up into the mountain of God. And he said to the elders, "Wait here for us until we return to you. And behold, Aaron and Hur are with you. Whoever has a dispute, let him go to them." Then Moses went up on the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. The glory of the Lord dwelt on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it 6 days. And on the seventh day, he called to Moses out of the midst of the cloud. So Moses, in Exodus 24 here, he sojourns and waits on the mountain 6 days. And then after 6 days, on the high mountain, from a cloud, God speaks to him. And in Mark 9, after 6 days, Jesus takes Peter, James, and John on a high mountain. He's transfigured before them. And in verse 7 we read, "A cloud overshadowed them, and a voice came out of the cloud." So the transfiguration here makes an unmistakable allusion to Mount Sinai. And in both events, in Exodus and here in Mark, God is speaking. God is saying something about himself. At Mount Sinai, he gave the law. He revealed his moral will to Israel, which means God revealed his character. And he's doing the same thing here in the transfiguration. God is still here in Mark 9. He is showing us his character. He is still showing us who he is and what he is like, except this time he doesn't give us the law. He gives us his son. Look at verse 7. Look what God says. "And the cloud overshadowed them, and a voice came out of the cloud. 'This is my beloved son. Listen to him.'" If you want to hear God, listen to Jesus. If you want to know what God is like, if you want to see who God is, pay attention to Jesus. Look at Jesus. Listen to Jesus. Years ago, I had a friend who was doing ministry with some inner city kids in Compton, Los Angeles. And she was sharing her life with these kids. She was mentoring young girls every day, all the time. And over again, though, she kept running into this problem, this dilemma. And so she emailed me and some others and kind of described the dilemma, was asking for some help. And here's what she kept running into in her ministry. The kids that she hung out to and the kids that she ministered to, they all thought that God hated them. Because they had seen so many hard things, because they had seen so many terrible things, they had formed a view of God that said that God was against them. And that view of God kept them from coming to Jesus. And so my friend emailed asking for some help here with this dilemma. And I realized as I was reading this email, this is not an uncommon dilemma. Many of us have done this. Many of us do this. This is how it goes. We have a view of God that keeps us from coming to Jesus when actually the only way we can have the right view of God is when we come to Jesus. See? Our view of God can keep us from Jesus when really it's only in Jesus that we can see God for who He is. If you want to know, look, if you're new to Christianity, if you're new to religion, if you're new to God, and you want to know what God is like, if you want to know what God is like, not just your idea of Him, but if you want to really know what God is like, you have to look to Jesus. We have to listen to Jesus. That's what God says here. Listen to Him because Jesus is the revelation of God's character. Second point, Jesus is the radiance of God's glory. You see this in verse 3. I mean that in the literal sense. Look at verse 3 here. Mark describes Jesus' appearance. He was transfigured before them, verse 3, and his clothes became radiant, intensely white, as no one on earth could bleach them. And the word transfigured is the Greek word metamorphomai, which simply means to transform or to be changed. It's where we get the English word metamorphosis, which means the same thing, right? We're talking about basically when the appearance of something changes into something else. And here in Mark 9, Jesus, who had the appearance of an average-looking first-century Jewish man, suddenly changed into something else. His clothes became radiant and intensely white. And this was not your mother's bleach. That's what Mark says. That's what he's saying. No, nobody could bleach him like this. This is an otherworldly, intense, shining kind of white. And because we have imaginations, we can kind of imagine what this is like, right? Have you done this? You kind of imagine what this is like, a brightness that we can hardly look at. Right? We can imagine that. This would have been stunning for us to see. Now, we know from the Bible that God the Father is unseeable. Paul says in 1 Timothy 6:16 that God the Father is immortal and He dwells in unapproachable light, who no one has ever seen or can see. And John says the same thing in John chapter 1, verse 18. No one has ever seen God, but Jesus has made Him known. Jesus is the image of the invisible God. Jesus is the exact representation of God's nature. Jesus is the seeable person of the unseeable God, and yet in His glorified appearance, He Himself is almost blinding. When Paul saw Jesus in Acts chapter 9, it actually did blind him. Paul tells a story in Acts 22. He's on the road to Damascus, and at noon, Jesus appeared to him, and a great light from heaven suddenly flashed around him, and it made Paul fall to the ground. And because of the brightness of the light, Paul could not see for 3 days. And this is the glory that you can see. This is the glory that we can't. This is the seeable glory. And so honestly, we don't have categories for this. We can barely wrap our heads around this. The glorified Jesus, the transfigured Jesus, is the radiance of God's glory. He is communicated glory, and our natural eyes can't take it. Normal people like us cannot look into glory like that, at least not yet, because when Jesus is transfigured here in Mark 9, this is what's happening here. In Mark 9, Jesus is displaying himself in the full and final glory befit for a new creation. Jesus here is giving us a glimpse, even beyond his resurrection and ascension. He is giving us a glimpse into the glory that will be when all things are made new. What's happening in Mark 9? This is a heavenly vision. This is a heavenly vision which one day we will see with heavenly eyes. We will see it. We will see Jesus that way one day. That's why I think Peter goes here in 2 Peter chapter 1. 2 Peter chapter 1, he's at the end of his life. He's writing to encourage Christians, and he could have said anything, right? Peter could have gone anywhere because he's seen it all. Peter has seen everything. But he goes here to the transfiguration because he knows that when Jesus was transfigured, he saw a taste of the glory that is to come. Peter got to see the kingdom of God in its full power, which is what Mark chapter 9, verse 1 is about. Jesus says in verse 1 that some standing here will not taste death until they see the kingdom of God after it has come with power. And there's some debate on what Jesus is talking about here, but in all the Gospels, this saying from Jesus comes right before the transfiguration, and I don't think that's a coincidence. The full arrival of the kingdom of God is the glory of God reigning over the whole earth, embodied in the glorified Jesus, who Peter saw in the transfiguration. And he never forgot it. Jesus is the radiance of God's glory. Number 3, Jesus is the realization of God's plan. Verse 4 tells us that when Jesus was transfigured, there also appeared Elijah with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. And this is quite the scene, right? These two guys are Jewish Hall of Famers. They are Old Testament big deals, and they're standing here with Jesus. Peter, James, and John see this. They're standing with Jesus, and they're talking with him. And we have to wonder, man, what are they talking about? Well, in Luke's account, in Luke's gospel, Luke tells us that they're talking about Jesus' exodus, which means they're talking about what Jesus is going to do to rescue his people. That's the conversation they're having. Jesus with Moses and Elijah. Now, why these two, right? Why Moses and Elijah? In the Bible, Moses and Elijah are really the two most prolific prophets in the Old Testament. Moses is at the top, and then Elijah is with him, and together they represent the Old Testament's witness to Jesus. They are forerunners to Jesus, and they symbolize how them being here, symbolizes how they and the entire Old Testament points to and anticipates Jesus. So Jesus, standing here talking with these two guys, he is the culmination of everything these two guys were about. He's the culmination of everything these two guys were about. And so that's worth the conversation. And so they're talking. God's plan is finally realized. God's plan is finally coming to fruition. The culmination is here. Jesus is here. I'm assuming that's what they're saying. I told them, Moses says, I wrote this down. I told them that back in Deuteronomy 18, that God was going to raise up a prophet like me, but better. And I told them that they should listen to him. I wrote that down, and finally, Jesus, you're here. Finally, Messiah, you're here. I really doubted, Elijah says. That time in 1 Kings 19 when Jezebel was hunting me down, and I went up on Mount Sinai and I complained. I said, God, they're wiping us out. This whole plan, your whole plan is going to be lost. But then God passed by and he spoke to me, but it wasn't in the wind or in the earthquake or in the fire, but God spoke to me with his voice, and he told me, I will leave 7,000 in Israel who have not bowed the knee to Baal. And he did. Year after year, God did. And now you're here. Now it's happening. Messiah, you're here. Jesus, you're here. The culmination of God's plan has finally come. Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Having gone before him, now they stand in his presence and they defer to him. All of redemptive history has been waiting for this. Jesus is the realization of God's plan. And Peter has an idea. Let's build 3 tents for each of you, he says in verse 5. Now, why did Peter say that? Well, Peter said it because he didn't know what to say. I love that Mark tells us this in verse 6. Because remember now that Mark got this story from Peter. Okay, so Peter has told Mark this story, and I like to imagine how that went. Peter is talking to Mark, he's telling Mark what happened, and Peter gets to this part of the story, and Mark stops him and says, wait. Why did you say that? And Peter's like, I don't know. I didn't know what else to say. And Mark's like, I'm including that in the gospel. And he did. It's authentic. This is a proof of that. I love Peter. I mean, he's just talking, you know. He's just saying stuff. And as he's talking, a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice came out. This is my beloved Son. Listen to him. Just like Moses had said, listen to him. Listen to Jesus. All eyes should be fixed on Jesus. All ears should be hanging on his word. God the Father here, like he did at Jesus' baptism, like he will do at Jesus' resurrection, he is honoring Jesus. He is putting Jesus forward. He is lifting Jesus high. And he is telling us, all of us, he is telling us with divine certainty that Jesus is the one. And in a moment, everything's back to normal. And it's just the 3 disciples with Jesus again, and they're coming down the mountain, and Jesus told them not to say anything about this until he's raised from the dead. And in verse 10, Mark says that this confused the disciples even more because they didn't understand the resurrection part. Because they still didn't understand how Jesus was going to die. And so they're trying to figure this out, and they ask Jesus about Elijah. Why do the scribes say that Elijah must come? And this is a leading question, see. Malachi 4 in the Old Testament tells us that before the great day of the Lord, Elijah must come. The disciples knew that. They also knew that when Elijah comes, he is going to restore righteousness in the land and bring harmony to human relationships, which sounds a lot like peace, right? And because they were taught this and because they expected this, they didn't see how it fits in that the Son of Man must suffer and be rejected and be killed. Because that doesn't sound like peace at all. That doesn't sound like harmony. That doesn't sound like righteousness. And so their question here subtly counteracts the idea that Jesus will suffer. And so Jesus responds, yes, Elijah does come to restore all things. Verse 12, and how is it written of the Son of Man that he must suffer many things and be treated with contempt? once again, Jesus is coming back to suffering. He's telling his disciples not to overlook the suffering. It's going to happen. God planned it this way. And to drive it home, in verse 13, he says that indeed, hey, Elijah has come. He's talking about John the Baptist here. And he says, they did to him whatever they pleased. And he's right. John the Baptist lost his head. So the goal, the great day of the Lord, the goal here, it is indeed righteousness and peace and the restoration of all things. But that's not here yet. First, there's suffering. And now, the suffering part, if it wasn't already hard to understand, now it has become even more difficult for the disciples to understand, because now Peter, James, and John have to hold together Jesus' suffering and his glory. They have just seen the incomparable glory of Jesus. They saw him radiant, shining in majesty. And now they're supposed to remember that he is going to be treated with contempt. He is going to be killed. What? We saw his glory. He's going to be killed, mocked, despised, rejected. What? They have to hold this together now. Majesty beyond our dreams and suffering that we just can't fathom. They have to hold it together now. Glory and cross. Glory through cross. It's both. And that's hard. Isn't that hard? That's hard to hold together. It's a struggle. It's a struggle. It's a struggle to understand the ways of God. And so it is with life off the mountain, which is where we all live, off the mountain. It's not easy. So what do? What does this mean for us? I think the story right after the transfiguration helps us. In verse 14, Jesus, with Peter, James, and John, come down from the mountain and step into a commotion. I'm so excited to tell you this. I just want you to know that. I'm so excited to tell you this. They come down the mountain and there's commotion. And there's the other disciples, there's a crowd of people, and then there's the scribes, and the scribes are arguing with them. And when Jesus asked what's going on, a man from the crowd spoke up, and he explained that he had brought his son to the disciples to be healed, but they couldn't do it. His son was possessed by a spirit, and the spirit made him mute. And whenever the spirit seized the boy, it would throw him down and make him foam at the mouth and grind his teeth, and his body would become rigid, which is a very bad thing. This is a very bad thing here. So this father is looking for some help. And now he's talking to Jesus, and they bring the boy to Jesus in verse 20. And right away, when the spirit saw Jesus, the boy started convulsing. And Jesus, like a doctor, he asks the dad more questions. Well, how long has this been going on? And the dad said, since he was a child, which meant probably that this had been going on for a long time. I'm sorry. And the dad said, oftentimes the demon would throw the boy into fire or water. He'd try to kill him. This gives us a little more perspective on what this dad is dealing with, right? This is constant worry. This is perpetual anxiety that he's just worried that something is going to go terribly wrong with his son. And maybe today, this is how I think, maybe today is the day when he's going to get hurt. Maybe today is the day when he's going to fall into the fire or drown in the water, or he's going to have some kind of seizure when neither of his parents are around. The father is concerned for his boy. which sounds a lot like motherhood all the time, right? I see you, moms. I want you to know that. I see you. I'm thankful for you. So much of motherhood is this consistent, low-grade worry, right? It's like motherhood is like this lump in your throat about whether or not your kids are going to be okay. It takes courage to be a mom. And so moms, if anybody, moms understand where this dad is coming from. He wants to help his boy. And so he says in verse 22, Jesus, if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. And we shouldn't rush past verse 23 because Jesus puts it back on the man. He says, if you can, all things are possible for one who believes. Does that mean then that what is standing in the way of his son being healed is neither the sickness? Does that mean that what is standing in the way of his son being healed is neither the sickness nor God's refusal to heal, but the Father's own faith? Is this the moment when the dad who has pointed his finger at other things his whole son life, perhaps even at God, now he is staring down the finger pointing at him? Is it because his faith is too small? What if I were in his shoes? Maybe in a moment like this, if we can imagine ourselves, maybe we would be crippled by a table-turning statement like this from Jesus. Wait. You mean it's me? You mean I'm part of the problem? I'm asking for you to heal my son, and you're telling me I need to have more faith. Maybe we would do that. Maybe we'd ball up in self-pity, and we'd be debilitated by the fact of our own brokenness after we've been staring at the brokenness of others so long. Maybe we'd do that. Or maybe like this father, we love our loved ones so much, so deeply and fully, that rather than get lost down the rabbit trail of our own weaknesses, we cling to the possibility of healing. And that's the only thing we can think about, and we'll do whatever it takes. That's what the Father does here. Jesus said healing was possible. Jesus said healing could happen, and the only thing standing in the way is me. I just have to believe. And so this man, in this moment, he teaches us. He says, okay, I believe. Help my unbelief, Jesus. I believe. Help my unbelief. That phrase, I believe, help my unbelief. That is life off the mountain. That's where we all live. That's where we live. We live here. I believe. Help my unbelief. It's that we know Jesus. We know we've read about him in the Bible. We know that he is the revelation of God's character. He's the radiance of God's glory. He's the realization of God's plan. We've seen in the scriptures who he is. We know what he can do. We know what he can do, and so we believe. And we also know what we're up against. We also know what we're dealing with. Help my unbelief. We know that Jesus is good and able, and we've seen his heart at work, I believe. We know that we are prone to wonder, and we've seen how our hearts work. Help my unbelief. So we live here, life off the mountain, believing and asking for help, trusting and wanting to trust more, resting in his sufficiency, and getting squirmy in our souls. I believe. Jesus, I believe. Jesus, I believe. I believe. Help my unbelief. And Jesus heals the boy. Jesus answers that prayer. Jesus meets us here. That's what he does each week at this table. That's what the table's about. It's at this table that Jesus reminds us that he has us. He's got this. It's his body that has been broken for us. It's his blood that has been shed for us. And he is reminding that as we eat and drink, he is reminding us, fight to believe in me. Fight to believe in me. But remember, I've already fought for you, and I've won. At the cross, Jesus took all of your sin, all of your guilt, and he died in your place. On the third day, he was raised again in victory. And by that, he accomplished your redemption. So that right now, in this moment, all things that stand against your soul have been defeated. Jesus has conquered them. He holds you. Jesus right now is holding you, and he will not let you go. I believe. Help my unbelief. If that's your confession this morning, welcome to the table. We invite you to eat and to drink with us. As the servers come forward and prepare the table, we're going to serve the bread first. It's all gluten-free, so enjoy that. And you can take it and retain it. I'll come back up, and we will all eat together this morning. His body is the true bread. Let us serve you.